I remember the story when it was kind of in the news, and as with all those kinds of stories, you get three headlines
Yep,
worth of information, and then you end up going, okay, so some crazy logger cut down a tree. I don't get it.
exactly.
And I just read your the Golden Bow, the original article, I guess,
Hmm.
about it that was in the New Yorker,
Yeah.
and learned a little bit more. But was that what the motivation was to stretch it a little farther? It was like, okay, three lines doesn't help.
Well, I moved to British Columbia in '98, so I missed all those news stories.
Hmm.
So I'd never heard of the golden spruce until 2000 when I went up to Haida Gwaii to do a magazine piece for Outside Magazine.
Hmm.
And then I had some time to kill, and I had a map that was out of date, a tourist map that had the golden spruce on it. So it all started when I went looking for the golden spruce, and it wasn't there. So it really had nothing to do with headlines. It had to do with
A detective story.
yeah, it had to do with this logger. I was on the logging road looking for this place, and he said, well, you can't see that tree anymore. And, well, why not? It was cut down. And, I knew it was protected. Well, who would do a thing like that? Well, a logger did it. Well, why would he do that? Well, it was a protest against logging. And baffling, well, what happened to him? Well, he disappeared in a kayak.
Yeah.
So every question just widened the mystery. And then I just started scratching away at it.
It's a bit of a cold case at that point. I know that criminally it's still technically an open case, I guess.
Yeah, it was then.
With the RCMP and such. But how do you go about, who do you talk to fill in the blanks?
I went to those, 1 and 2 line headlines first. I just started scrounging around for articles. And then I started calling people up who were named in the articles.
Mm-hmm.
And then at a party I ran into a guy who worked for Weyerhaeuser who knew a guy who had been Grant Hadwin's supervisor up in Lillooet. And that really kind of opened things up for me. But it still took me 6 months after that to figure out where Grant Hadwin was actually from.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
So,
and that really was, detective work of just calling all the Hadwins in the phone book, and none of them were related to him. All his immediate family with the Hadwin name had died. Were already dead by 97, in fact. So there was nothing to go on. And it wasn't until I knew that I'd heard he was a good tennis player. And so I called every single tennis club in the lower mainland, and then I had to find tennis clubs that were functioning in the 1960s. And then I had to find people who were actually teaching tennis in the 1960s, and finally through that vector, found a 92-year-old man in North Vancouver who had taught Grant Hadwin tennis.
Mm-hmm.
And he knew all the family. And he said, oh, Barbara Johnson, which is Hadwin's aunt. And of course, I would never know. Name's different.
Yeah.
But she lives in West Van, and I went to see her, and she was 85, sharp as a tack, and loved Grant dearly and had actually been very close to him. And that's what opened it up.
Wow,
but it took a long time.
We're going to talk, I think, detective story a little bit more a little later when we get into the tiger, too, because that sounds kind of like a detective story as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But I want to talk about the golden spruce a little bit more just because of the regional relevance of it. Well, your headline, below your New Yorker article, the main headline that says the golden bough, it says, Grant Hadwin got a chainsaw and did something terrible. And, of course, culturally, for the Haida, obviously it was something terrible, and for the community that did affect it as a tourist thing. Do you feel, or I don't know, maybe you want to keep your feelings out of it, but you might have an interesting insight on it. Do you think that he made his point about logging with the removal of the golden spruce?
He made his point after other people worked really hard to try to figure out where he was actually coming from, and that's not an effective way to make a point. And I think I didn't write that subhead for the article, but I totally agree with it. It was a terrible thing, and so. But as far as making his point, he was actually more articulate in his, quotations and writing about it, and. That gesture was just so, off base.
Abstract and over the top.
And it was so, yeah, exactly. It was just way too complicated. And also he was working with faulty information. He was he was so obsessed with the logging company and the way the logging company had co-opted it. And just the hypocrisy of saving 12 acres and mowing down 1,000 acres behind it. That he wasn't seeing the proverbial forest for the trees on every level, I would say.
I guess the Hollywood kind of question about the whole story after he, you can probably give a little bit of the backstory better than I could, but after he opted not to fly or take the ferry to his court appearance after cutting down this sacred golden spruce, he kayaked and essentially disappeared. I know you cover a lot of the different options of what happened to him in the book. Do you have like a gut feeling as to what the final result was for him?
I think he I think he drowned. That's
Yeah.
what I think. And I don't know, if he got tired out there, if he got cold, if he got disoriented. I mean, imagine there are no lights out there. It
Mhm.
really is. There are fewer people on that coast now than there were in 1750.
Mm-hmm.
And it's you get a couple miles offshore and the lights go out. It's dark and stormy, and 8 hours of that, will wear down anybody.
Yeah.
And one bad wave, and he could have lasted longer than most people, but that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
If you're 4 miles offshore and the water's 41 Fahrenheit, you last 2 hours, you last 3 hours. It doesn't matter. It's going to get you. So that would be my conservative guess.
Now, the Tiger, this is the new book. Are you just finishing up a tour, or are you kind of coming right in the middle of touring?
I've been touring the past couple months, and I would say that the bulk of the heavy tour is over. In fact, Tofino will really be, my last stop on for the time being.
Well, that's not a bad place for your last stop.
It's a fantastic place for a last stop.
So the Tiger is kind of another one of those stories that I think started small and then turned into a lot. How did you come across that story?
Well, at Banff. I just came from Banff now, from the film and book festival there, which was wonderful as always. And back in 2006, I attended the festival and was doing a presentation on the golden spruce. And as a presenter, you get passes to see various things.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a pass to see this film I'd never heard of called Conflict Tiger, which was about this tiger in the Russian Far East, right near the Chinese border, who was wounded by a Russian poacher, identified the man, and then hunted him down in a very systematic and relentless way, and eventually staked out his house and killed him and ate him. And then this unleashed a chain of events that involved, the hunter hunting the other hunters, and those hunters, human hunters, hunting him back, and it was this colossal cat and mouse game through the Russian forest.
This sounds complicated, being in a forest in Russia in the winter and tigers' actions. How would you reconstruct all of that?
Yeah, it is complicated, and one of the saving graces, for me as a researcher, and also for Sasha Snow, who made the film Conflict Tiger, was the fact that a specially trained squad of anti-poaching squad had been put in charge of the case, and they had been trained to gather evidence in such a way that the evidence could be taken to court to try cases all the way through to convictions.
So like a forensic documentation.
Exactly, of the tiger's actions. And so he had videotape, still photos, he made maps, he did interviews, he wrote detailed descriptions of everything he knew about the animal and everything that it did to mark off the victim's property and to mark off himself.
Mm-hmm.
And so he really, he preserved this very vivid picture, including film footage, which was absolutely horrific. And so there was a lot to go on for, both for somebody, were it a poaching case that was going to be tried in court, or for a researcher coming up afterward, like a filmmaker like Sasha Snow or an author like me. It was an incredible wealth of data. And then there was also a lot known about the tiger himself. Once you kind of learned a lot about tiger behavior and how Amur tigers, what are commonly known as Siberian tigers, how they behave in the snow and around people and around prey, you could extrapolate and speculate quite responsibly about the tiger's motives and certain thought processes that it went through, because you could see what was amazing is that tigers are taught by their parents, to their mothers specifically, to hunt. And this tiger had been taught by its mother, and it hunted deer and boar until it was wounded by Markov.
Mm-hmm.
And then its whole modus operandi changed, and it became focused on human dwellings, on human possessions, and it began to use those dwellings and those possessions as ways to entrap humans. I mean, amazingly intelligent and adaptive.
Personal vendetta, almost? Is it against humanity in general, or was it?
That's what's a puzzle about it. A wonderful writer named Stephen Budiansky said, the thing that our biggest obstacle to understanding animal behavior is we have no language. We have no way to describe thought processes that don't involve words. So we're imprisoned by our language, and so you have to use words like revenge or vendetta, and those are it feels like anthropomorphizing, an animal to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But you look at, what the animal's doing is it's removing in a very focused, conscious way threats from its landscape. It's targeting individuals, and it happened every time to target armed Russian hunters, the kinds of people who had injured him.
Oh, so it wasn't just sneaking into villages and dragging off?
No. It wasn't at all. It was very focused, and it also hunted in a very specific and sinister way.
Serial killer novel about a tiger?
Kind of. It is amazing and very unusual. So, needless to say, it raises so many questions about animal consciousness,
mm-hmm.
about our relationships with large predators. A famous, West Coast book is Sid Marty's, The Black Grizzly of Whiskey Creek,
mm-hmm.
which addresses a lot of the same issues. I'm just reading it now, and we met and had dinner, and it was great. And reading his book, it's so, I feel like we're really wrestling with so many of the same questions, just using different apex predators for that exploration. And it's another one of these human-engineered tragedies. It wouldn't have happened,
mm-hmm.
without a human attack first. It's these are things going on in our world right now, and important to understand, I think. A motive for me, as I kind of got into the story, is the keys. One of the key themes in the story is, or the key issues raised is the question of conservation and how
mm-hmm.
do we manage our, increasingly vexed relationship with an animal who is critically endangered.
Mm-hmm.
There used to be, an estimated 70 to 100,000 tigers, at the beginning of the 20th century, and now there are probably fewer than 3,000 wild tigers left in Asia, and it's kind of unimaginable, but there it is, and maybe 300 or 400 left in the Russian Far East. Poaching is the number one threat, and they're in serious need of active protection. So that's a theme that runs throughout the book, and one that I'm kind of bearing down on at the moment.
I guess nobody can ever say this is the solution, but a possible step towards a sustainable relationship with the tigers.
Well, I think to stop shooting them is probably a really good step. They really very, very seldom, at least in Russia, attack humans without a motive
mm-hmm.
and without instigation. And if there's an adequate prey base and adequate space for the tiger to roam around, they're not going to want to be
mm-hmm.
near humans or pester them. And so and the issue now, the number one threat being poaching, the number one priority, and I think most conservation groups agree on this, is that anti-poaching teams like the one that I describe in the book
mm-hmm.
Need to be adequately trained, adequately paid, and deployed in the forest.
What's the market for poaching a tiger? Is it James Bond villains' rugs, or is there something else?
That's I'm glad you asked that. There is, the James Bond villains' rug is a real piece. Wealthy businessmen, drug dealers. And there's a few sects of monks also that are interested in tiger skins, and the tiger skin really there's a worldwide market for that, not just in Asia.
Mm-hmm.
So there'll be, I'm sure there's tiger skins draped on sofas in Moscow and
mm-hmm.
and maybe some in Denver, Colorado. I don't know, but they get around. And the core of the market is in China and neighboring countries where powdered tiger bone is believed to be a good remedy for various aches and pains and rheumatism. The genitalia are believed to, enhance your sexual potency. There's various, a wide variety of other remedies, completely dubious remedies that are derived from other parts of the animal.
So I was just kind of thinking, for the purpose of someone who might be listening, there's probably not a lot of market impact we can have by boycotting a certain product over here that might...
No, I really don't think so. I think what we can do, and I have a website, johnvaillant.com, to keep it simple, that has information on what people like us can do to impact and mitigate tiger poaching, and that really is to donate money to a specific set of organizations who are actively engaged in anti-poaching work already on the ground in Asia. I vetted these agencies very carefully.
Mm-hmm.
One for the ratio of donor money that actually goes to the field. So I only picked high ratio
mm-hmm.
Donation to field work agencies, and the other is the time and expertise that they have in these designated areas where tigers are. So that narrows it down a lot, and I feel very confident in them and in their abilities, at least as far as one can be. And a portion of the proceeds of the book at my end are also going to those efforts.